We talk about the man who was the storyline of the draft. What is your sense right now of Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland?
Is the chatter real? And that's my question. And can you make Cleveland and Andrew Berry, the GM, and Kevin Stefanski, the head coach, say, why not? We've heard a lot of reports from a lot of different people, like, man, Shedeur looks really good in this OTA, or really good at that OTA, or he's commanding the offense. And now you're going into minicamp. Can Shedeur continue that positive chatter, if it's real, and get that organization to sit back and say, you know what? Why not start him? Why not see what he has this year? Because either you figure out who your starter is moving forward, or you weaponize those 2 first-round picks in Cleveland for the 26th draft.
Wait, hold up. You're telling me a 5th-round pick is making veteran quarterbacks nervous in Cleveland? That the same kid who got prank called on draft night because he fell so far is now having coaches scratch their heads wondering if they struck gold. According to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, Shedeur Sanders didn't just make an impression at Browns minicamp. He flat out answered the bell when everyone was watching. And here's the kicker that'll blow your mind. Peter Schrager just dropped a bombshell saying Sanders was outstanding in the building. Brothers, we might be witnessing the biggest draft steal since Tom Brady. And I'm about to break down exactly why Cleveland's front office is probably kicking themselves for not taking this kid earlier. Look, I'm gonna be straight with you. When Shedeur Sanders got that call telling him he was going to Cleveland in the 5th round, you could see the shock on his face. This wasn't just disappointment. This was a kid who knew he belonged in the 1st round getting absolutely disrespected by 31 teams. But here's where it gets interesting, and why you need to stick around for this entire breakdown, because what's happening in Cleveland right now is nothing short of extraordinary. The whispers started small, just little reports here and there, about how Sanders was handling himself well in minicamp. But then Monday, Dan Orlovsky dropped some knowledge that completely changed my perspective on this whole situation. He said something that made my jaw drop. He told us that Sanders came into minicamp as good a young 3rd-day pick you can imagine. Now, Dan's not one to throw around compliments lightly, especially about rookie quarterbacks. This dude has been in NFL locker rooms. He knows what real talent looks like when it walks through the door. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. And this is what separates Shedeur from every other late-round quarterback we've seen in recent memory. Dan Orlovsky laid out exactly why this kid is different. And I'm telling you, when you hear these details, you're going to understand why Cleveland might have just pulled off the heist of the century. First off, let's talk about what Dan said about Sanders' superpowers. And I'm using air quotes here because this is where most people get it twisted. We're so used to seeing quarterbacks who wow us with cannon arms or legs like Lamar Jackson. But Sanders, his superpowers are completely different, and honestly, they're way more valuable in the long run. Dan broke it down perfectly. Sanders' gifts are all the things that actually make quarterbacks good: processing and reading the defense. Think about that for a second. While other rookies are struggling to understand basic NFL concepts, Sanders is already showing the mental side of the game that usually takes years to develop. And here's the kicker. Dan said these abilities become obvious in training scenarios, and that Sanders is going to look great quickly. That's not speculation. That's an NFL veteran telling us what he's seeing with his own eyes.
That said, I'm told that he came into minicamps, and I spoke to people this weekend, and was as good a young 3rd-day pick you can imagine in how he handled himself. Now you're asking him to find a way to not only get on this roster, which he will, but to then be able to get reps in training camp and then win the job. That's asking a lot. However, you're asking a quarterback room that doesn't have that. There is no Jared Goff or Matthew Stafford in there. It is wide open. If you're thinking the best man can win, he might have the most skills. It's just really hard as a day 3 pick to do that in June. He's gonna have to do it in August.
Now, let's dive into the reports that are coming out of Cleveland, because this is where things get really juicy. Dan mentioned that he spoke to people this weekend and got firsthand accounts of what Sanders looked like in minicamp. And get this, every single report has been overwhelmingly positive. We're not talking about he's adjusting well or he's learning the system. We're talking about scouts and coaches saying this kid looked like he belonged from day one. But here's what's really got me fired up about this whole situation. Cleveland's quarterback room is wide open. Dan made this point perfectly when he said there's no Jared Goff or Matthew Stafford in that room. It's Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, and now Sanders. And let's be real about what that means for a 5th-round pick with legitimate 1st-round talent. Joe Flacco, great guy, consummate professional, but Dan said it best. I know what Joe Flacco is. There's no mystery there. Kenny Pickett, he's been on 3 teams in 3 years, which tells you everything you need to know about how the league views him. That leaves Dylan Gabriel and Sanders as the only 2 guys in that room with real upside potential. And here's where it gets really interesting. Cleveland has every reason in the world to want Sanders to succeed. Dan pointed out something brilliant that most people are missing. He said there's nothing but upside for Cleveland in the situation. Think about it. They got a guy who many analysts had as a second-round talent in the 5th round. If he pans out, they look like geniuses. If he doesn't, they lost a 5th-round pick. The risk-reward ratio is absolutely insane. But let's talk about what's really separating Sanders from other late-round picks, because this is where his background and preparation are paying dividends. Dan mentioned that all the stuff that hurt Sanders in the draft, playing only for his father, not having an agent, skipping workouts, none of that matters now. And you know what? He's absolutely right. All those perceived red flags that made teams pass on him, they're relevant now. That he's in the building. What matters now is, can he read a defense? Can he make the right throw? Can he command a huddle? And based on every report coming out of Cleveland, the answer to all those questions is a resounding yes. Here's what's really got me convinced that something special is happening in Cleveland. The timeline Dan laid out. He said Sanders needs to force that organization to play him because he's so impressive, and that it will start this week. We're talking about a 5th-round pick who's going to make coaches question their depth chart after just a few practices. That's not normal, folks. And here's the part that should have every Browns fan excited. Dan thinks Sanders is perfect for Kevin Stefanski's system. He broke down how Sanders' skill set is custom-made for the under center play-action style that Stefanski runs. This isn't just about raw talent. This is about scheme fit and how quickly Sanders can contribute. Let me paint you a picture of what could happen here, because the dominoes are already starting to fall. Sanders continues to impress in minicamp, which leads to more reps in training camp. Those reps lead to preseason opportunities, and if he shows out there, game over. Cleveland's going to have to seriously consider starting him. And here's the thing that makes this whole situation so fascinating. Cleveland's 2025 schedule. They start with some winnable games, which means if Sanders is ready, they could actually throw him in there and see what happens. Dan even mentioned that the organization needs to figure out if you don't have your quarterback of the future on the roster this season, which means they're actively looking for their next franchise guy. But let's address the elephant in the room, the criticism that Sanders has faced. Throughout this process, people questioned his leadership, his experience playing only for his father, his decision-making process with agents and workouts. But here's what those critics are missing. None of that matters if you can play football at the highest level. And based on everything we're hearing out of Cleveland, Sanders can definitely play. Dan made a point that really stuck with me. He said Sanders has to be methodical in trying to earn playing time, but that the chatter and reports are all positive. That's not coach speak or media hype. That's legitimate feedback from people who know what they're looking at. Here's what I think is really happening here, and why this could be the steal of the century for Cleveland. Teams got caught up in the off-field stuff and missed the on-field talent. Sanders has legitimate NFL-level processing skills, arm talent, and game management ability. He just happened to come with some perceived baggage that scared teams away. But Cleveland, they're in a position where they can afford to take a chance on a high-upside guy. They've got veteran leadership in the quarterback room, a good coaching staff, and most importantly, they've got nothing to lose. If Sanders develops into their franchise quarterback, they just solved their biggest problem for the next decade with a 5th-round pick. And let's talk about the precedent here, because Dan made a comparison that should have everyone's attention. He mentioned that Cleveland could come out of this looking like the same geniuses that San Francisco looks like for taking Brock Purdy. Think about that for a second. Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant and became a franchise quarterback. Sanders was a 5th-round pick with infinitely more college production and hype. The potential is definitely there. What's really got me excited about this whole situation is the timing. Sanders is walking into a perfect storm of opportunity. Cleveland needs a quarterback. He's got the talent, and he's motivated by the disrespect he felt on draft night. That's a dangerous combination for the rest of the league. And here's the part that should terrify other AFC teams if Sanders does win the starting job. Cleveland just got exponentially more dangerous. They've got a good defense, playmakers, on offense, and now potentially a franchise quarterback on a rookie contract. That's a recipe for sustained success. But let's be real about what needs to happen for Sanders to actually win this job. Dan laid out the roadmap perfectly. He needs to continue impressing in minicamp, earn more reps in training camp, and then capitalize on those opportunities. It's not going to be easy, but based on everything we're hearing, he's already ahead of schedule. The question isn't whether Sanders has the talent that's been established. The question is whether Cleveland has the courage to start a 5th-round rookie If he continues to outperform the veterans, and based on their current quarterback situation, I think they'd be crazy not to. Here's what I think happens next. Sanders continues to impress throughout the summer, earns significant playing time in the preseason, and potentially pushes for the starting job by week 1. Cleveland's front office is going to be faced with a decision. Stick with the safe veteran options or roll the dice on the rookie who's been turning heads since day 1. And honestly, I think they're going to choose Sanders. Not because they have to, but because he's going to make it impossible for them to choose anyone else. You've got a 5th round pick who's showing 1st round skills. You don't keep him on the bench just because of draft position. The bottom line is this: Cleveland might have just pulled off the heist of the century. While other teams were worried about Sanders' background and off-field stuff, the Browns were focused on his ability to play football. And based on everything we're hearing, that ability is already showing up in a big way. So here's my question for you. Are we witnessing the birth of the next great late-round quarterback story? Is Shedeur Sanders about to prove that talent always rises to the top, regardless of draft position? And most importantly, how good could Cleveland be if they actually found their franchise quarterback in the 5th round? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Sanders can actually win the starting job in Cleveland? And if you want to stay updated on all the latest Browns news and NFL draft analysis, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're going to be following this story all season long, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next.